Ikoma raised his head and looked at the monster. Rocks began to fall on the guys from above. Ikoma frowned. Then he raised his head up. Satsuki put in front of him a staff and thought that Ikoma was pressed against the wall. The pharaoh was illuminated by a bright light. A glow appeared near Ikoma's hand. He applied gravity reduction and weight reduction. The statue was illuminated by a purple glow, and the guy lifted it into the air, directing it towards the enemy, but it broke into small pieces after the blow. Ikoma thought that this was their chance, and opened his mouth and shouted for Satsuki to shoot him in the head. She pointed her staff at the monster. A bullet of darkness appeared from her staff. The pharaoh's eyes lit up. The girl opened her mouth in surprise and thought that it didn't work. Ikoma grinned and thought that he was caught because if there was such strong armor there, then there was something important behind it. The monster turned its head. Hoshinin approached it and thought that this was its blind spot. The monster looked around. A projectile flew at the girl and she flew away from that place. Covering her face with her hands, she thought that because of his forearms, it was completely impossible to get close to him. She remembered how Ikoma was able to attack him head-on and did not understand how he did it. Ikoma appeared behind her and called her, saying that he would weaken him and she would destroy the mask with her skill. Magic swordsmen have the skill of penetrating armor. It takes a little time to prepare, but it significantly reduces the enemy's defense. Hoshinin brought the sword to her face and said that she understood. Then she looked worriedly and thought about what he was going to do. The guy rushed towards the enemy. The power of the fallen pharaoh lies in his forearms, but if they are immobilized, he will move much slower. Ikoma, gritting his teeth, moved forward, leaping into the air. He thought that then they would have a chance to attack. Then Ikoma swung. Ikoma used gravity pads. The chains went towards the enemy. This is magic that restrains the movements of monsters. He used it to tie the pharaoh's hands. The chains began to tighten on his body. The guy thought that this would be enough to slow him down. He used the chains closer to the shoulders. In this position, it would be very difficult to untie them. Ikoma grinned and thought that such tactics could be used against large and multi-armed opponents. He watched the monster with interest. The blonde did not look at all this and thought that it was necessary to act now. The girl frowned. She rushed forward with a scream, breaking through the armor. Ikoma and Satsuki watched this. Hoshinin hit the pharaoh's neck. Cracks went down his face and he grabbed it. His face began to flow down. The guy frowned and thought that this was his weak spot. The girl noticed that he had a very creepy face. Ikoma rushed towards the monster, thinking that he needed to attack while his movements were slow. The fallen pharaoh roared loudly. Ikoma used gravity shift and soared into the air. The enemy looked up at him. He remembered that he had seen this move before. A powerful attack that affected all hands. Ikoma landed on the surface. The enemy raised both hands up. Ikoma watched this. It was predictable that while his hands were tied, he would use this technique. And also, Ikoma noticed that with such an attack, he lowered his head strongly. The monster's eyes lit up. A dungeon occurred and Ikoma screamed that this was the end. He moved towards the monster and used a meteor fall. The pharaoh's head shattered into small pieces. The guy grinned triumphantly. The decapitated body fell to the ground. Ikoma held a sword in his hands and said that the boss of the Tomb of the Ancient Kings was defeated, and a notification about receiving experience points and leveling up appeared. The girl was kneeling next to the knight. She looked through the gap in his helmet, and he thanked the lady. The guys were standing next to the corpse of the boss, and the guy said that after the death of the enemy, something appeared. The king's staff emitted light, and a notification about its characteristics appeared. Ikoma took the weapon in his hands and assumed that it was a staff. He examined the item, realizing that it was perfect for his partner, and knew that such things often dropped from the main ones. But he thought that they would have to continue looking for things to sell for a long time, and noted that luck was on their side and they got the staff. Satsuki raised her fist to her neck and asked if she really could take it, to which he asked her not to even doubt. Mad Clown looked down and gained energy. The sword was shining and Ikoma was talking about how she helped him get equipment in the Mad Theater. However, Hoshinin also participated in the battle. The girl looked back and said that he could not worry about it because he saved them. Ikoma looked away, holding a staff in his hands. Shinin nervously took her hand and said that the guy could keep the staff and magic stones. She looked away, embarrassedly going to say about their competition. Ikoma closed his eyes and suggested that we consider the girl the winner. The blonde held her hand while he said that as they agreed he would take his words back because she definitely took it seriously. She looked away thinking that it was good that he understood this. The partners looked forward and they were satisfied. Ikoma tilted his head to the side saying that in order for her to advance as an adventurer she needed to stop doing such things, to which the man aggressively asked what he was talking about. He clenched his fist saying that being an adventurer may not always bring an income unless one has a high level, then one can try to provide, but due to a disaster the lady's mother lost her legs and she also has 5 younger brothers. The girl was sitting in a wheelchair with a photo and was surrounded by children, and her father was no longer with them. And even now the woman has a hard time providing for her family. Hashinin was angry and looked at the knight. Ikoma watched as the interlocutor asked her partner not to blab too much about her family. He rubbed his head and said that he thought she loved money because of her selfishness. The girl looked away saying that she always takes it seriously. She relaxed her eyelids and, imagining a preview of various videos with her participation, said that everyone was afraid of disasters and she wanted to give people smiles in such turbulent times. She became weary after the interlocutor noted that this was a good goal. Ikoma smiled, showing his teeth, and praised her. Hashinin looked ahead in surprise. She turned away in displeasure. People with papers stood in front of children. The city was hidden behind a green hill. The girl turned back and asked about the condition of the equipment, and said that it would make a great video demonstrating the skills of an experienced adventurer. She put her hand on her chest and, after saying that fortunately there was no damage, said that this was wonderful. The knight looked at the tablet and said that they had few magic stones and there were no frames from which to edit a video, and this was a difficult situation. The servant looked at her asking if she should at least take the stones from the boss, to which she replied that she did not want to accept handouts out of pity. Hashinin approached the subordinate and asked if they had anything they could use, to which he hesitantly said yes. The fighter looked ahead and noticed something. The camera display was recording the battle with the boss. Light was reflecting off the glass windows of a tall building. The apprentice looked away. The student looked at him while the other was talking about something. The guys were sitting at a table with books on it. Satsuki pulled the phone to the puzzled guy and asked him to look at the video. He looked away saying that she should not look for information about the dungeon by sight. Ikoma looked away and suggested asking the experienced adventurers. They looked at each other meaningfully silent, and they felt the appearance of a mysterious adventurer. The video was paused and was titled appropriately. Viewers wrote comments admiring the speed and risk. Ikoma smiled. He raised his head contentedly and closed his eyes, thinking that this is why they were looking at him like that. The violet-eyed girl raised her hand, thinking that more than 1 million views in less than a day was exactly what one would expect from a partner. The blonde was sitting at her laptop, noticing the large number of views. She raised her hand up, thinking that she was the best. She looked at the phone lying on the ground and became wary. Koma's name was displayed on the screen, and she thought that she forgot that they had exchanged contacts. She closed her eyes and asked into the phone if he missed her. The girl held the smartphone to the phone, asking if he had finally decided to become her fan, to which he replied that he had seen the video. Hashinin was very embarrassed, saying that they had agreed that if she won, she could post the video, and if he didn't like it, she could delete the video later. Hashinin looked away tensely. Ikoma looked down and was meaningfully silent. He remembered how she had yelled at the knight, and was trying to feed his family in such a troubled time. Ikoma was calm and after a short silence asked to close the topic, to which she agreed. The blonde happily looked away saying that her interlocutor was now on everyone's lips. She smiled asking to shoot a joint video together. Hashinin looked at the screen and realized that he had hung up. Ikoma was shaking, holding his finger on the screen, and was asked what she had said, to which he said that he had not heard. He was sitting at the table and was at such a speed of development. Perhaps he was able to obtain a very rare item in his past life. The ring was shining and was near the portal. He smiled, knocking on the table, and realized that the whole story would change dramatically if he got it. The girl looked at Ikoma's level with a trembling hand and thought that for confirmation, you need to have at least level 35, and noticed that he really did have it. Ikoma looked ahead and was told that his application was approved. The guys walked away from the table. Ikoma looked at his partner and said that she would soon be able to increase her rank too, to which she said that as expected, he was able to reach rank C. The man trembled and looked at the monitor, and he was surprised that he was the first to reach this level in the guild. He remembered Mad Clown, and in order to increase his level, you had to constantly defeat monsters of a higher rank. His image popped up in his head, and without the proper knowledge, it was not easy to achieve it. Satsuki was happy for her friend and said that adventurers who reached rank C were already considered first class, and she would do everything possible to keep up with what the guy said her name to. They walked through the building and Ikoma said that he wanted to reach rank B. Satsuki looked at her interlocutor and asked again, saying that it was impossible to do this in a month because only a few people were able to reach such a high rank. Ikoma looked away, saying that he wanted to find one item. The tree was illuminated by light from above in the library, and the item was in a place where it was impossible to get without rank B. And this place was called the Library of Mysteries. The shadow of the monster fell on the floor and a ring of wisdom fell out of the dungeon boss, and the girl asked how he knew about it if the monster had not yet been defeated. They looked at each other, and she asked about the effect of this ring, to which Ikoma clarified whether she really wanted to know. He looked up, talking about the ring of wisdom, that it could be related to the phenomenon of the occurrence of dungeon. The city was painted in light colors. The girl looked ahead in surprise and asked again. Plants curled around the ring, and the ring of wisdom was a rare item with incredible potential. However, in a past life, its location was unknown, but according to rumors, it contained the secret of the occurrence of dungeon, and the guy had little time. But if possible, he would like to get it. The hand extended the ring forward. Ikoma looked at the interlocutor, saying that he could not involve her in his adventures. Therefore, if she refused, then he would understand, to which she replied that she wanted to help him because she was indebted to him. Satsuki hid her hands behind her back and happily said that she would be glad to help him in any matter. Ikoma closed his eyes and thanked her. Ikoma looked at his phone and said that he still needed to reach rank B in a month, and that he needed to think through a plan well. He turned the screen away from himself, covering his face with his hand, and noted that he had already thought about it. The guys were walking through a dungeon littered with skulls, and he had managed to make a plan for capturing dungeon. The monster looked ahead and growled. Ikoma struck the boss and went to the side. A bright blue light was coming from the dungeon. The mermaid held her ears while Satsuki hit her. With the help of a meteor fall, Ikoma cut the creature in half. Ikoma's hand touched a notification about his partner's level, and he said that they had passed 4 dungeons in 2 weeks. They stood at the system notification, and he said that the last boss gave them problems, to which she replied that although it was a low-level dungeon, they had to try hard to defeat the boss there. They walked down the street and Ikoma said, "However, the boss's movements at this level are too unpredictable, and you shouldn't expect anything unusual." The light from the screen illuminated his face, and he thought that he had chosen the dungeon well, which were easy to defeat because he had carefully studied the information about the Tokyo dungeon for their level. The smartphone showed a diagram of the dungeon, and Ikoma said that if they passed 5 more dungeons of the 30th level, they would be able to pass to rank B. The sky above the city was dotted with clouds. There was a stand on the table. The girl held her hand in the air and said that after checking the status, they confirmed that the minimum requirements were met, and it was very difficult to raise such a level in such a short time. To which Ikoma replied that he wanted to move to rank B. The man watched as the redhead said that a strict exam was held to move to that rank and asked to wait a couple of days, and the observer asked that they must be joking. The man looked ahead and asked if they really wanted to get B rank. The big guy had an emblem on his clothes. Ikoma looked at it with a smile, thinking that he was a contract soldier. He looked at the paper and thought that experienced adventurers can sign contracts with guilds. Their job is to manage dungeon and respond to unforeseen situations, and also help with capturing difficult dungeon. They have a huge influence on the guild. The contract soldier looked ahead with a confident grin and asked if these kids wanted to get B rank, and said that this could not be. But then the secretary said with concern that they had already reached level 40, and they also had a good track record. He was wildly surprised to hear this. He turned his attention to Ikoma and his partner, and thought that such small ones had already managed to defeat a lot of bosses. He immediately imagined his emblem and thought about how he had been working as an adventurer for over 7 years and was the only B-rank adventurer in this guild. Olga looked down with disdain and thought about what they wanted to tell him, that this upstart was trying to take away his glory. Akoma calmly looked at him and exhaled heavily and thought about how they had attracted the attention of an unpleasant person again. The big man stood in front of him with a smile and said that he could not accept this, and that such youngsters who had not worked for even a year were not worthy of this rank. Ikoma became more serious and thought about how Olga was one of the few B-rank adventurers in the guild. Perhaps the guild would not be able to ignore the opinion of such an adventurer, and that made him laugh. Then the guy imagined the institution and thought about how applications for promotions were reviewed by the heads of the guild and the opinions of the contractors were also taken into account, and it would not be possible to avoid his decision. But there was a catch. Ikoma turned his attention to his companion and thought that if it were him, he would have kept quiet. But she was with him, and they would not retreat. Ikoma looked at Olga and asked if he could find out the reason for the rejection of the application. He suddenly began to speak. He took a small step forward. Then he loomed over the guy and said that they were too inexperienced to wear such a high rank and that the holders of rank B have a lot of responsibility. Then he became even more menacing and asked if he thought that you can just come and get what you want. Satsuki immediately shrank in fear. Other adventurers began to gather around and questions about the fuss and words about how unlucky it was to catch his eye were heard. But then Ikoma became more serious after he was told that he had to be at least 17 years old to be an adventurer, and asked if he knew how many 17-year-olds had reached that rank. Olga was taken aback by such impudence and froze, asking what he was talking about. Ikoma lowered his head and said that it had been 15 years since the dungeon appeared. He imagined a map and said that in Japan only 6 people were able to reach rank B in less than a year. And then he asked if he wanted to say that they were all promoted by mistake. Ikoma immediately thought about killing high-class monsters. And if you kill enough, it is impossible to level up in such a short period of time. The guy frowned and said that he was strong enough to get rank B, and if he rejected his application for some other reason, he was ready to listen to him. Olga froze and tried to say that the laws related to the dungeon were still being refined. He tried to look confident and said that he should listen to the opinion of a more experienced adventurer. But then Ikoma imagined a statue of the goddess of judgment and said that he should look at their achievements and not make decisions based on his own feelings because the decision should be made in accordance with the rules. He immediately turned to the secretary and said that this is the policy of any adventurer's guild. She immediately climbed into her laptop and said that everything is really so. Satsuki looked at him from behind and anxiously thought that it was surprising how he dealt with an experienced adventurer, and thought that Ikoma was showing his superiority even here. The people around immediately began to whisper and say that Olga was reined in. Then Olga got angry and thought that these scoundrels dared to laugh at him, and thought that he would not forgive them and that he would regret that he decided to argue with him. Then he looked away and asked about his current class and level, to which the short-haired girl immediately said his name and the class of a level 38 gravity master. Olga immediately looked away and thought that he had never heard of such a thing before and thought that this was probably some kind of rare class. But then he imagined the guy at the throne and thought that this was probably a magic class. And if he had good connections with the warriors, then it was no wonder that he had such a high level. Ikoma nodded when he heard that he admitted that he had rushed to conclusions, and he should have taken his abilities into account. But then he spoiled all the honey, folding his arms across his chest and shouting that this would only happen under one condition. He looked at the guy with a smile and said that he would personally check if he was worthy of rank B and said that as soon as he was ready they could come to the training hall. The conference room, the reception desk, and the training arena were on the same floor. Some onlookers came to watch the battle from above. The contractor, with an unpleasant smile, folded his arms across his chest and said that if he beat him in a training fight, he would agree to a promotion. But if he failed, then there was no need to expect a new rank. The observers began to crowd a little and discussed what they heard that Olga killed 2 people in a training fight. Olga leaned his elbows on the railing and said that this guy was clearly in trouble, and he just decided to take it out on him. Satsuki began to worry and folded her arms across her chest and quietly called Ikoma. The contractor looked at his opponent with a smile and thought that he had already disgraced him several times in the guild, and it was time to pay. He immediately imagined the difference in their levels and thought that he was 2 heads taller than him. Then the man imagined them in a group and thought that he also had a magic class and that he was an ordinary villager who had been helped to raise his level. Then he imagined himself and his class in the most pompous form with an axe and a bear in the background and thought that he was a warrior druid, and this was a class that enhances physical abilities with the power of animals. He smiled like a villain and thought that his class level and experience made him better in everything, and then he was going to trample his pride into the dirt, and he would never want to appear here again. But Ikoma calmly began to leave through his inventory. He looked at the proud opponent and thought that he clearly had high physical abilities. Afterwards, he looked at the window he had called up and thought that he might be in trouble and thought that he should spend his accumulated points. His skill points were 27 and his magic levels were immediately increased. He held out his hand in front of him with the most serious expression and thought that with the improved gravity control skill, he could increase his stats even more. Afterwards, the guy tensed up and thought that there was nothing he could do about it because he wanted to improve these skills anyway. But the contract soldier looked at him with a smile and asked if he thought that improving his skills right before the fight would help him. He became even more insistent and said that accidents during a fight were common and that he needed to be careful. But then Ikoma calmly closed his eyes and suggested not to worry. Afterwards, he took out his sword and said that he hoped that he would also listen to these words. The veteran looked at him menacingly and thought that he was too self-confident. He turned his attention to the opponent's companion and the observer, thinking that this would be an example to everyone. Olga smiled slightly again and thought that if they thought they could be rude to him, they would regret it very much. After that, he raised the huge sword over his shoulder and asked if it was time to start, and then said that so be it. He would not use his skills and he could use whatever he wanted. Ikoma calmly looked at him and meaningfully remained silent. He stood all alone while many people were watching him and thought about starting their duel. The villain grinned slightly at that moment. He created a purple sphere in his hand and said that he was starting and thought that he would use gravity reduction. Olga watched him without changing his stance and thought that he had a low level and also a magic class. And every adventurer in the guild knows that magic classes are useless, and none of his attacks can harm him. After that, he focused on his opponent and thought that it was time to have some fun. A sharp flow of mana began to flow around him. Ikoma stood motionless and looked ahead. His blade almost touched the warrior's neck. The unshaven man immediately became wildly scared, asking what happened. He began to block his attacks with a huge sword and wondered where such speed came from because he was a low level. After that, the guy was already behind him and had already raised his dagger to attack. Olga tried to turn around and wondered what was happening and thought that he was simply caught off guard and immediately ordered him not to dare to be impeded. He immediately swung his sword and thought that he couldn't escape and called him a scoundrel. But as it turned out, Ikoma was already at the very ceiling. The higher one felt it and quickly turned around. Then he felt the distortion and cursed in his head thinking that he couldn't resist. The guy was already flying towards him with his weapon raised. But then Ikoma hit him in the chin with his knee. Olga immediately spat out blood and lost his balance. He immediately tried to wave it off and cursed again. His breathing became very heavy and intermittent. The old wolf immediately remembered the hit and thought that it was almost impossible to kick from such a position if he was a newbie and wondered who he was. One of the spectators started filming it on his phone and thought that they were making fun of him and wondered how he defeated Olga. His friend leaned on the partition in surprise and said that there was nothing surprising about it because it was just a test of skills and Olga did not use skills. The veteran put his hand in front of himself and thought that he would not admit it and would not let this kid get the same rank as him. But here, Ikoma was as if in another dimension during the strike. Olga looked at him in horror and thought that he could not hit and wondered if he could lose. He immediately imagined how he was filmed and laughed at and thought that he had to win otherwise everyone would laugh at him. He was horrified and thought that he could not disgrace himself like that in front of everyone. Olga felt the presence of the enemy behind him and thought that his level was much lower than his and wondered what was going on here. Ikoma frowned and thought that he must not know. He immediately imagined a guy in a cloak lifting rocks and thought that a gravity master was the strongest class one could obtain, and with the gravity control skill one could compensate for the lack of physical strength. The boy quickly parried the blow and thought that in short duels his mana should be enough to use gravity skills to the maximum. He looked menacingly in front of him and thought that even though he had a higher level, it would be very difficult to win without using skill. He immediately imagined his fight with the swordsman and thought that Kaoru was much stronger in close combat, and he had good fighting skills and he did not have such a pronounced dislike for him. He immediately imagined them as a single person. After that, he created a smooth movement and thought that it was time to finish. His blade at that moment approached the veteran's side. He hit the blade and used gravity doubling. Olga held on with all his might and clenched his teeth and thought about how his sword suddenly became heavier and wondered if it was only good in speed. The man struck. He stood in a stance and moved his hand with the sword to the side, not understanding whether his opponent had disappeared. He looked ahead and did not believe that such a thing could happen. A figure appeared behind the stunned opponent. He landed on the floor. Ikoma jabbed the blade into Olga's back. The enemy's gaze froze and tension was visible on his face. He remembered how he outplayed him, and at the moment when he attacked the man, he reduced gravity, taking advantage of the moment, jumped over him, and at the moment of the jump, he was in the opponent's blind spot, and therefore, it seemed to him that Ikoma simply disappeared. The spectators watched the battle and shouted that he was able to defeat a B-rank adventurer. Satsuki put her hands on her chest, saying that it was great because Ikoma was able to win. The contractor was trembling and assumed that they were joking. Confusion was visible on his face, and he could not believe that he could lose to him, and did not admit it. Ikoma stood behind his opponent and said that there shouldn't be any problems now, and he wasn't allowed to finish. Ikoma fell into a stupor, feeling the thirst for blood. The warrior turned and his eyes glowed red. He rushed to attack using the rupture of animal claws. Ikoma parried the powerful attack. From the powerful blow, Ikoma was thrown back and he groaned. He leaned on his sword and thought that he had lost his vigilance when he defeated him in a duel. The enemies stood opposite each other. The man grinned while he imagined the previous attack and realized that he had used the weapon as bait and attacked with a skill. And the contractor asked what was the matter and assumed that he hadn't had time to react. Olga looked forward while the spectators from above said that this was a mean act and reminded him that he had promised not to use skills. Olga looked away. Ikoma looked at him from under his brows and asked if they would continue and what was the matter. The man was furious and asked why he dared to be rude to him even when he was barely standing on his feet and thought that he would never admit defeat. Ikoma looked at him and said that this would be enough. Olga frowned and clicked his tongue in displeasure. The sun's rays fell on the windows of the high-rise building. The man underestimated his interlocutor because of his level. Rumors of defeat would not give him life in the guild. His lips stretched into a smile. He agreed that it was pointless to continue, and then he rejected his application for a rank increase. The guy looked seriously. The onlookers were shocked. Olga put out his hand, explaining that the decisive blow was not delivered. With such an approach, Ikoma would not cope with strong demons. He arched an eyebrow, saying that he left so many gaps in his defense, but he did not take advantage of them. Ikoma held on to his wound, which he received when his opponent could not use skills. He understood that he was not able to react quickly. The audience was dissatisfied. One spoke up, realizing that he had no intention of acknowledging him from the start. Olga looked at the man with dissatisfaction, horrifying him. They approached him from behind. While he regretted what he said, his comrade advised not to anger him because you never know what Olga could do. Sho went out to the balcony, shouting that it was unfair, trying to shame him for it. Sho frowned, looking at him with dissatisfaction. Ikoma raised his head in shock, realizing that it was Sho. The guy dissatisfiedly stated that Ikoma was able to defeat him fairly, but he broke his promise and used the skill. Olga blushed with anger, hearing that the contractors were completely arrogant. Sho looked at the guy from the balcony. He said his name. Olga gave him a thumbs up, calling him his best friend, saying that he will definitely help him. The boy looked at him skeptically. He appreciated his help, but he was embarrassed that he was called his best friend. Satsuki was standing behind him. She was clearly uncomfortable. Behind him, Sho from the balcony continued to swear. But until the boy was acknowledged, all this would be pointless. The boy struck from his knee. The difference in strength was obvious. Ikoma pointed the sword at his opponent's back, wondering if he had hurt his dignity, realizing that he should have hit him harder. He frowned and thought. Olga frowned in displeasure. The boy suggested that he should have just given in to him. The boys looked away when someone asked what the noise was and what was going on. Olga frowned, realizing that it was the deputy head of the guild. Serizawa looked at them, saying that he was looking for a man, also asking what was going on. Olga spread his arms and covered his eyes, saying that it was a small test and that he wasted his time. Serizawa looked at the boy, noting that accidents were not uncommon during training, so he asked him to be careful and seek medical attention. Olga smiled, saying that it was just a scratch, nothing serious. Serizawa frowned, saying that was enough. He turned around, telling Olga that he needed to talk to him urgently, so he asked her to follow him. Olga with the sword on his shoulder looked and said that the test was over because unlike his opponent, he was a busy man. Someone's hand hit the railing. He was called a coward. Sho looked and said that he didn't think that such a person was one of the best adventurers in the guild. The boy held his head. Hearing the question of what to do, he would have to find another way. The two men were heading somewhere. Serizawa asked what this fight was for. Olga replied that the boy wanted to get B rank, but he pointed the boy to his seat. The man looked ahead wondering if this kid had applied to get B rank, suspecting that he was underestimating adventurers. They walked to the door where Serizawa scanned his card. They sat opposite each other. Olga with his hands behind his head asked what the man wanted to talk about. He looked at them seriously, saying that they were talking about a B-rank dungeon, a beast mausoleum. Something was sparkling and shining in the gloomy place. This dungeon is difficult to control. Adventurers level up faster and get good materials. A hand reached for the tablet on the table. They received a message about a sudden change in the location of monsters in the dungeon. The city was ablaze. The man adjusted his glasses, saying that at this rate they were expecting a disaster, but they had to eliminate any risks. The boy took a piece of paper asking if he wanted to capture the dungeon before the disaster happened. The papers were on the table. The agency wanted to keep such a dungeon. The guild leader also insisted on keeping the dungeon. Olga frowned because the man wanted him to close this dungeon. Serizawa looked at him, asking him to change the leader's mind. Because they knew little about dungeon, he did not think it was wise to make such hasty conclusions. His hands were on his leg. He was told that he always gave boring tasks for the adventurer. He was indignant, saying that they had not finished talking yet. Serizawa covered his hand with papers. He was told to be quiet. Sheets of paper fell from the man's hands. He made it clear that this was not his problem. The man picked up papers from the floor, telling the interlocutor to look at the data again. His foot stepped on the sheet. He asked if he thought he could find out anything about the dungeon by digging through the numbers. Olga waved goodbye, saying that he had more experience, and if something happened and there was trouble, he would just close the dungeon. The man's fist hit the floor. He shouted that it would be too late because they didn't know how exactly the disaster would go. The guy disappeared behind the door. Serizawa frowned, looking after him with displeasure. He stood with his back to the panoramic window, understanding that they were obliged to protect the city. The man hoped that nothing would happen. In the darkness, a fox-like creature with many tails, human arms, and two heads lay on the ground. Its eyes, surrounded by human arms, suddenly opened. The boy sat in the cafe, discussing how terrible it was. Satsuki remembered Olga, not expecting such a high-class adventurer to be such a person. He stood with his hands on his sides. The rank increase could only be obtained in his own area. They were sure that Olga would not allow it. Someone was entering the magic library. B rank was required to enter. Satsuki could pass the exam, but her level was still too low. The guy thought the girl looked at sitting opposite him. With his hand on his chin, he closed his eyes, thinking about what to do. Hashinin slammed her hands on the table, saying that she heard that he had some problems with a contractor during the exam. He showed her his phone, saying that she had quickly gathered information because one of her fans had sent her a video of the fight. A girl in a school uniform had sent her a text message. In the comments under the video of the fight, everyone was talking about the adventurous tourney. The girl said that he showed it to the whole world and her subscribers were furious. The guy was skeptical, saying that he would get by when she suggested getting more views. She imagined herself in the arms of a young man who offered to repay her debt with everything he could. Ikoma looked at the girl, calling her by name. With her hand on her head, she beamed, adding that she thought she could make good money from this. The guy closed his eyes, realizing that she was still talking about the same thing, adding that they still didn't know much about the dungeon. Olga stood near the sign. They couldn't do anything. Guilds rely on the experience of seasoned adventurers, and that guy was hardly the type to change people's minds. The girl listened keenly as the boy said that he didn't care about others at all. Satsuki listened attentively to Hashinin, who agreed with his point of view. Her gaze frowned. She blushed. Hashinin folded her arms, saying that she was worried about the guy. The girl looked suspiciously at Hashinin, who was turned away, asking if she happened to like Ikoma. Hashinin blushed and became indignant, asking what she was talking about. The boy was drinking coffee. The girl said that he was too rude and self-confident. Such guys were not her type. She closed her eyes, trying to justify herself by saying that she was helping him because he saved her life. Satsuki remained silent, hearing her words about her being an idol and they still can't date. The phone on the table was glowing. The girl was asking her about her suspicious look. The guys were surprised when the tablet screen lit up red. The girl took the phone, reading a warning that a new B-rank dungeon had appeared in the city, so they should proceed to a safe place. The guys took out their phones. The dungeon appeared very close. The girl said that it was a beast mausoleum, asking if there would be an invasion. The Cyclops was climbing out of the portal. The invasion was a disaster. When demons enter the human world, to stop it, you need to defeat the boss and destroy the dungeon. The guy looked ahead and thought it was strange because in his past life, this had not happened. Ikoma thought his memories were like those from a film, one after another. He wondered if this was a coincidence, or the result of his changes in this world. Hashinin looked at the phone, realizing that the dungeon was getting out of control. She frowned, realizing that he had passed all the checks and the guild should be monitoring him. She held the phone in her hands, realizing that she had not yet been in a B-rank dungeon. Her level was too low. Hashinin remembered being with her younger brother, and her father was tormented by a monster. She understood that there could be people in the city who did not have any level at all. The girl looked at them, shouting that she was going to the dungeon. Hashinin looked at Ikoma, who stood up and said that they were coming too. The guys were together. The dungeon was out of control. It was unknown what could happen if they did not figure it out now, so they hoped that it would be possible to get by with just an invasion. The people stood in front of the monster inside the dungeon. The werewolf with red eyes was level 34. The adventurer pounced on him, swung his arm, shouting berserk. The man shouted for everyone to get out of the way. He stood in front of the dead werewolf. Olga grinned, not understanding why this was happening now. He recalled the conversation with the deputy chief and Ikoma, realizing that he had embarrassed himself again, not understanding why everyone wanted to make a fool of him. The people behind him began to praise him. After all, this is what they expected from an adventurer of his rank. He defeated such a monster with one blow. The man looked at them, shouting at them to stop chatting. After all, the monster was only a C rank. He turned to them, saying that he was stronger than those they had worked with before, and they agreed, calling him the Chosen One. The man told them to disperse and stay in touch. The city was burning. He knew that if there was too much damage, his position could be in danger. The boss was a level 47 Phantom Fox. The guy knew this, so he knew that defeating him was not that difficult. He recalled Serizawa, intending to defeat the boss before everyone else, become a hero, and throw all the blame on Serizawa. He smiled and suggested to defeat the boss quickly, and end it all. The streets were burning even more. People were confused. The monster's paws stepped on the ground. People wondered if it was the boss. An evil fox appeared in front of them. He suddenly began to grin viciously. People were scared, realizing that the monster was completely different from their information. It was a two-headed demon fox spirit, level 55. Its monstrous appearance frightened everyone. The adventurers stood in front of the monster. Its heads were roaring. The monster could evolve into another life form. This often happens in combination with other troubles from monsters. Olga tensed up, realizing that it was not only the flooding of the labyrinth, but also the evolution of the boss. The guy was scared when he saw the level of the monster. Not understanding how they could resist this monster, he looked at his partner, who suggested retreating and finding another squad. They needed to buy time and wait for help from other adventurers. The boy stood in front and worried, knowing that if their efforts went down the drain, His role as the portal's protector would be in jeopardy. He looked at them and shouted that he was a B-rank adventurer. They looked at each other in disbelief, while Olga explained that he had been in similar situations many times. His eyes turned red. He confidently declared that they could not retreat, and that he could easily deal with this monster. The boy began to shout, asking if he could defeat it, telling him that it was too reckless. If he attacked it, he would die instantly. Olga bared his teeth, wondering how they dared to doubt his words. His lips stretched into a smile. He said that there was nothing to be done, so he would help them gain some confidence in themselves. He extended his hand with a red cloud of energy. He hit the boys, who began to suffer from its effects. It was a magical skill of a beast warrior. It temporarily increased the attack power of a person. The boys held their heads with their hands. Olga wished for them to throw away their worries and go to battle. He remembered himself in the past how he used the skill as a decoy. However, it had been a long time since he used this ability. He kicked one of the boys with his foot forward. They walked towards the beast with swords in their hands, preparing to attack it. They were going to attack under the influence of the skill. The boy was going to use them as bait, and then deal the finishing blow himself. Olga smiled confidently, understanding that an ordinary adventurer would not survive unless he used cunning. The monster stood in front of the attackers. Suddenly, some strange aura appeared. Its eye opened wide, emitting this strange energy. It expanded using its demonic destruction. The debris around suddenly began to move. The adventurer saw the monster lift the debris with its ability. He looked up, not understanding anything. There were 2 rocks in the air. All the rocks flew at him. He ran, not understanding what kind of spell it was. The rocks also fell on the guys who were under the influence of his skill. A huge boulder fell right in front of Olga's face. He dealt with it with the King of Beasts strike. He became nervous, realizing that this was a telekinesis skill. The monster grinned while the adventurer realized that the scope of its ability was too large. The demon fox spirit was approaching him, but this was the first time he encountered a level 55 magic ability. Olga turned around, realizing that he had to do something immediately. The monster suddenly pounced on the surprised adventurer. He held his sword in fear, realizing how strong it was. A strange energy emanated from his eye. Olga understood that he had to run while those guys distracted him. The guy dodged the stones that flew at him. Ikoma covered himself with his sword from the falling boulders. He was very surprised, looking to the side. The monster swung right in front of him and wounded him in the chest. Blood splashed and screams were heard. Olga lay wounded, understanding that the beast was too strong. He remembered how the guys distracted him. He did not understand how the monster appeared here. In close combat, it had no equal. And how the fox wounded, not understanding why it happened so easily. His heart was struck by energy. It was a dead man's skill, allowing you to disguise yourself as a dead body for a few seconds. Only beast warriors have this skill. The fox looked straight ahead. After the monster turned to the side, the guy understood that he needed to act now. Olga ran away, looking back at the monster, realizing that he had to run. He didn't have time to care about the others. His life was important. The monster's eye was blazing. It spread its tails on both sides of the adventurer. Looking at him, the monster swung. The boy was very surprised when he noticed his tail. The monster struck him, waving its tail. Olga lay wounded again, not understanding how he noticed it. He could no longer move. He looked at the monster with his mouth open, telling himself that he would not die in such a place. The fox looked away, starting to use telekinesis again. The adventurer was surprised, looking at him, realizing that he was using his skill again. The monster held the man with his power. The frightened boy thought that the monster decided to mock him as well. His eye was at first resting and then sparkled brightly. Frightened, Olga opened his eyes wide. Looking at the antics of the fox demon spirit, he stuck his tentacle in his mouth, after which screams were heard. Drops of blood appeared. The sky was cloudy. The city was still on fire. Ikoma with a sword in his hands looked at the killed monster. He looked away. They had received 544 experience points. Hashinin was sitting next to the man and using her healing skill. The man looked at his hand and was surprised that there was no wound. The guy looked and told him to run in the direction they came from. He shouldn't meet any monsters on the way. The man turned around and shouted a huge thank you to them before running away. The girl was standing next to the guy. She called out to him. The city was burning and people were running away. She said that they wouldn't be able to protect everyone. If they didn't clear the labyrinth, there would be more victims. Her look was serious. Ikoma agreed with her. Ikoma took out his phone. The clock showed the time. More than half an hour had passed, but the threat was still not eliminated. The fox demon spirit was sitting on the ground. The boss should have been defeated by one of the squads, but too much time had passed, and there was still no result. Holding the phone in his hand, Ikoma looked away, realizing that he had to prepare for the worst. A man and Olga flew at the girl, laughing evilly. The girl held back the blow of his sword. Sparks were emanating around. She shouted at him to come to his senses because they were a squad of ex-horses. The man looked at their slaughter and said that it was useless to convince him he had gone crazy. His eyes were glowing red. Probably this was the influence of the monster's skills. The plate with Olga's photo said that he was a B-class adventurer with a rare class of beast warrior. What consequences would happen if he ended up on the enemy's side is unknown. The guy and the girl rushed to attack. They attacked Olga from behind. He was fighting with another adventurer. His lips stretched into a smile. He had fangs as if he had gone wild. He screamed loudly, deafening those around him with his scream. The man clenched his teeth and covered his eyes from such a scream. Olga touched the exorcist with his hand. The guy was very scared looking at this picture. The man watched as Olga attacked the boy with a King of Beasts strike. He clutched his sword in his hands, looking at his opponent with displeasure. Their blades collided. His strike was easily blocked. His eyes were glowing. His fangs were sticking out. The dark-skinned man knew it was useless. The weapon still swung over him. The girl screamed Kurazawa's name in fear. Olga laughed evilly. The man was at the adventurer's feet, realizing that a mortal fight with him was like a fight with a high-level monster. It was just a side effect. A terrifying aura reigned in the city. It was a disaster that none of them had encountered. It was not a task that adventurers or exorcists could handle. Olga raised his hand, intending to injure his opponent. He swung his hand at him. The boy shouted words to make gravity decrease. His sword flashed. It flew right above them, attracting all their attention to itself. He looked at him, assuming that it was a mental effect from the monster's skills. Olga's eyes were completely white, and he was growling like a beast. The man looked at Ikoma, warning that Olga was not an opponent that ordinary adventurers could handle. The boy suddenly circled around his opponent. He flew to the side, realizing that an adventurer of his rank should fight an equal opponent. He ran into him, and then realized that he was fighting a little differently. Ikoma dodged the opponent's strike, realizing that his movements were slower than during the exam, assuming that this was a side effect. Olga clenched his hand, starting to cast something, continuing to growl. Swinging, the adventurer used the King of Beasts strike. The youth hung in the air above them. Looking at him, he noted that the opponent lost his patience and attacked him prematurely. Ikoma struck from behind using the double gravity skill. The boy struck his opponent. Olga was holding his head. Ikoma was asking him if he was awake. The pupils in his wide eyes were visible. Ikoma was in front of him with a sword in his hands, remembering his words about fighting and continuing the rank promotion exam. The boy's out-of-breath face also came to him as a memory. Olga decided that he would not let him look down on him. He roared furiously. His eyes turned white again. He was going to use the berserker skill. He madly rushed to attack. Apparently, the influence of the monster on his brain had increased significantly. The boy with a sword in his hands was watching this bad aura. Ikoma appeared right in front of him. Realizing that even if the opponent was stronger, he could not drag out this fight any longer. So, he apologized to the opponent. Olga swung his sword. Ikoma rose higher. He swung his sword, realizing that the higher he rose in the air, the stronger the impact from gravity would be. Ikoma cut off his limb while delivering his terrible meteor strike. Olga was left without his right arm. Blood splashed everywhere. He screamed terribly. The severed limb lay in a pool of blood. Olga fell to his knees. Ikoma also cut his tendons. Now he will not pose any threat. The man looked at Ikoma in fear. He looked at the body of his opponent, realizing that while fighting an adventurer of his class, he had to hold back so as not to finish him off. The girls ran after him, asking why he ran away, receiving in response that the situation was an emergency. He ran faster than the girls since movement speed depends on the class. Satsuki was next to the man shouting that all these people need to be taken to a safe place. Ikoma looked up saying that they will not succeed. The dungeon boss was right above them. The boy looked at him realizing that they have a much more serious problem. The girls looked at the monster with alarm. It suddenly landed, a questionable aura emanating from its eye. A strong wind rose in the city. Ikoma stood in front of the wind. The boy clutched his sword looking at the monster. Its two fox heads were growling viciously, looking in different directions. The boss was definitely hunting. Satsuki looked, wondering what kind of monster it was, noting that its eyes were completely empty. The boy opened the window. The monster stood in the ruins. The boy showed that it was the boss of the Beast Mausoleum dungeon, a level 55 demonic fox. The information in the dossier about this monster was different from the one he received. He assumed that the evolution of the monster was instantaneous, which complicated the situation. The boy frowned, realizing that when a monster evolves, it is difficult to predict what skills it will use in battle. Hashinen stood next to him, saying that if they defeat it, they will stop the destruction of the city. The monster began to use beast necromancy. The guy realized that defeating it would not be so easy. Two fox ghosts appeared. They were phantoms of the 30th level. The guys looked at the approaching pack of ghost foxes. The girl was very surprised, realizing that the boss had summoned even more monsters. She remembered the past of her family. Realizing that if this continued, then even more innocent people would suffer. Two fox heads growled angrily. She understood that these monsters only enjoyed destroying and killing innocents. Her gaze was frowning. The guy approached the monster, telling the girls to take the wounded to shelter. Hashinen looked at him, asking how he would be. Ikoma looked and resolutely answered that he would try to defeat him alone. The girl reached her hand towards him. Her mouth opened. She was about to say something. Her legs stood up confidently. She said that when a guy plays a hero, she wants to do everything even more in spite of him. She pulled out a sword behind him, telling him to let him deal with the phantoms. They will also cover the wounded and their safety. The guys got into position, getting ready to attack the monsters. The men behind the girls said that this was crazy considering the level of this boss. He thought that if reinforcements did not arrive, they would all die. The guy looked at the phantom foxes, only telling him that he was in their way. Ikoma jumped up right above the girls and the fox. He looked down, shouting at them that he was leaving the phantoms to them. Satsuki looked up and answered positively. Ikoma rushed straight to the boss. His eyes lit up, getting ready to use the roar of the ghost beast. From the pile of rubble, stones began to rise into the air. From the destroyed building, boulders also rose up. The boy watched all this with a smile. There was a pile of stones in the air in front of him. He found it very interesting. The men shouted in shock. What kind of area of application of the skill of this monster is this? Clearly indignant, the fox head suddenly growled towards the guy. All the stones flew straight at Ikoma. The girl turned around, worried about her comrade. Hashinen frowned, realizing that he could not lose to him. A terrible aura emanated from this monster, but the forces were not used even at maximum. The man watched the girl fight off the phantoms. The fox heads growled discontentedly. It felt like this monster was just playing with them. The guy lit up, preparing to use gravity. He jumped from one stone to another with lightning speed. Kurazawa watched in shock, wondering how he could move so fast because he had never met such a fast adventurer before. Ikoma looked at the floor. In his past life, he had too much experience in speed fights. He thought that life with the thief class was good for him. He smiled a little. The monster looked at him angrily, waiting. The boy continued to move, calling it a pity that their spell did not work on him. The monster bared its teeth, starting to growl angrily. It pounced on the boy. Ikoma rose up with the stone in his hands, using the skill of partial gravity. Swinging, Ikoma threw a huge stone right into the mouth of the beast. The fox knotted this boulder with its teeth into small pieces. The fox turned its head to the suspicious glow. The boy realized that the monster was still distracted. He was creating a huge gravity bomb at this time. A terrible roar was heard and blood splashed everywhere. Kurosawa narrowed his eyes, realizing that Ikoma alone dealt with the boss of this level, wondering what kind of person he was. The boy sat on the throne. No doubt one day he will become the strongest adventurer in the world. The guy looked down, saying once again that if the boss was defeated, the dungeon should close. Ikoma remembered the moment of the fight and objected that without them who covered him from the phantoms, he would not have been able to win. The monsters were disappearing, so it was necessary to finish quickly. There was little time. The girls stood back to back. Ikoma clutched his sword, saying that he would finish him once and for all.